Yeah, so as I was explaining, so as a person who has been a victim of medical negligence, how do you prepare a watertight case so that you can hold these hospitals or health institutions accountable? Remember, medical negligence cases are technical cases because they operate at the intersection of medicine and the law. So it's important for you to know what exactly you need to prepare, what documentation you need, and what informs why you need those kind of documentation in your preparation for a medical negligence case. So the first document that you will need is the medical records. So remember, what we are trying to establish in a medical negligence case is that there was a deviation from the standard of care that the hospital ought to have given you as a patient, and in this case, as the pregnant mother. So there's usually a standard of care that the hospital ought to give you, and if they deviate or they do not meet that threshold, then it will be held by a court of law that the hospital was negligent, and for the injuries or loss or whatever damages that you suffered, they should be held accountable. So the first and the most important document that you need in a medical negligence case is the medical record. So for a pregnant mother, there's usually prenatal records, there's usually labor and delivery notes that are taken by doctors and nurses and the midwives, and there is the postnatal notes, that is after the delivery. So you need all those notes, the medical records, prenatal notes, labor and delivery notes, and the postnatal notes. Inclusive, they are called your medical records. So you need your medical records. And why is this important? So why would you, for instance, need a postnatal record or postnatal notes? This is to establish whether, for instance, the hospital or the medical practitioners took notes of your underlying conditions and your current status at the time, and they gave you the right guidance on how you can safely proceed with the pregnancy. So for instance, if a mother goes to a hospital and they have, say, gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes is diabetes that comes when a mother is pregnant. It is the responsibility of the hospital to have picked that up. And after picking that up, the standard of care is to ensure that the mother has constant checks on their glucose levels, and there's also constant checks or ultrasound testing on the child in the stomach to find out or to follow up that they are not under fetal distress or that they are doing okay. So if the hospital did not pick up that the mother has this kind of complication, and as a result of which it led to further complications down the road, then right there is a medical negligence claim that is brewing. Okay, so that's just an example in which prenatal notes or prenatal records can help. During labor and pregnancy itself, those notes are important because they can establish what transpired during that time. Maybe there were bad or misuse of different kind of equipment, say forceps. Maybe they use the forceps to pull out the child, and as a result of which the child then suffers from maybe cerebral palsy or any other complications. Maybe their arms were pulled off by force. So, and those notes can correctly capture whether during that time the medical practitioners were on top of things. Were they monitoring, for instance, the heart rate of the child or of the baby? Are there records that demonstrate that the heart rate, the fetal heart rate, was being monitored, and the mother's health status was being monitored? So those notes are crucial. I'm not a doctor, but those notes will reveal a lot of things of what happened during the delivery itself. And then lastly, you need also the postnatal records. So the postnatal records is basically after the child has been delivered. What happens? There could be instances that the child lacked oxygen post-delivery. So maybe had conditions of or indicated or exhibited hypoxia. What standards were taken? What measures were taken? What interventions did the medical practitioners come up with to ensure that that situation was arrested in time. So number one, and the most important thing that you would need, is medical records. And just for your information, medical records are your right as a patient. You can go to any doctor, any hospital, and request for your medical records. And if there's any frustrations there too, there was a high court decision on this, you just reach out to a lawyer and they'll be able to enforce that, and you'll get your medical records. And through the perusal of that medical record, you'll be able to establish what transpired. So that's number one, most important document you need. Number two is the witness statements of the people who are involved. So they could be nurses, they could be midwives who are involved in all this process. When they document what exactly happened, as a medical practitioner lawyer, I'll be able to pick out and say, Nurse X said that your blood pressure at the time was this, or Nurse Y said, actually pointed out correctly that you had maybe, you had earlier miscarriages. So it was not going to be preferred. So if you had earlier miscarriages, it will not be preferred for you to go to a normal delivery, because that's where the miscarriage happened. So the standard of care would have dictated that you go for a C-section. If, for instance, in the notes, in the witness statement of the nurses who were involved, they say that the child was under there was fetal distress, then the standard of care would have dictated that there's been an immediate intervention on C-section, upasuliwe ndo mtoto atolewe kama kutakuwa kumeanza kuonekana kuna complications za aina hiyo. So those witness statements by the nurses will be very, very crucial. But these witness statements mirror whatever is in the medical records, because the medical records is the most independent document that you need. Our witnesses, again, because of the force or because of the influence that the hospital has on them, they might not give a very accurate account. The other piece of evidence that you would need is, of course, videography, videotape. If during the delivery itself you captured the delivery process, then you might be able to have picked out a few things. Maybe the use of the tools, maybe they used wrongly the forceps, or the suction equipment. You were able to pick that up from videography, which rarely happens really, but if you have a husband or someone who is in the room and who would want you to document that, not that it's a very reliable way of doing it, but it could also help. The other thing is the fetal monitoring records. So the fetal monitoring records are basically the records for the child in the womb, how the child's heart rate was, whether the child was getting sufficient nutrients, or whether the fetus was under distress. So those records can give us an independent indicator of what was happening with the child. And if there is a disconnect between what was happening with the child, or there was abnormal kind of results which needed an immediate intervention by a competent medical doctor or a competent medical practitioner that wasn't done, then there's a problem there. There's also neonatal records. So neonatal records is after the child has already been delivered, how is the child doing? So perhaps the child suffered from fractures when they were being moved out. Maybe they were pulled by force, or maybe they used the wrong equipment, or maybe the child was under fetal distress, but there wasn't a timely intervention, and as a result of which now the child suffers from complications. Maybe cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy now is shida ya kiubongo, haezi coordinate vizuri, ama maybe mikono yake ilisukumwa kwa nguvu na sasa the nerves have been damaged, or maybe their face has undergone nerve damage because your use of other equipment like suction, na sasa mtoto ako na complications. So the neonatal records can reveal that. Also, the hospital itself has policies, standards and policies. So as a lawyer, I'd also want to look at what does the hospital have as their own standards. So if we establish, like in the hospital itself, it says if a mother comes to the hospital with this kind of complications, say gestational diabetes, then these are the standard of care that we ought to give them. And it happens that during this particular case, they did not adhere to those standards, then hapo hapo kuna kesi. What else can be used? Yeah, and of course, expenses that you incurred, whether you incurred expenses to go and treat the child, whether it's psychotherapy, whether it's medication, all that now is used to award you damages for that kind of medical negligence. So what will you be looking at in terms of the damages? What limbs are you looking at? So you're looking at pain and suffering, because the child suffered, felt pain. This was the first time they were coming to this world, and unfortunately they had to experience excruciating pain, and they have to know nothing else but pain and being disturbed and a very uncomfortable life as a result of actions from a medical practitioner who just didn't do their job. So we'll have damages for pain and suffering. We'll have damages for the now medical negligence itself. We'll have damages for future expenses in case the child needs psychotherapy or additional medication. So all these limbs, you can ask for damages from court, and you will be paid damages. So back to that case, maybe I give it a bit of an explanation. It is the father who was suing Aga Khan Hospital. The child suffered from Ebb palsy. Ebb palsy is more like a damaging of the arm nerves, because he was pulled out vibaya. The father sued Aga Khan Hospital. He was awarded 800,000 shillings as damages, and I think 50,000 shillings as future expenses. They were dissatisfied with that decision, proceeded to court, and upon appeal, he was awarded a whooping 15 million shillings for damages, plus another almost 8 million shillings for future medical expenses. So in total, it's coming to around 22 million. So this shows the importance of just being thorough, preparing your case thoroughly, ensure that we have all the documentation right, and ensure that we involve... the last thing I didn't pick, expert witnesses. Expert witnesses also play a very crucial role. These are people who are experienced in obstetrics and neonatology, which is basically matters to do with child delivery and child care post-delivery. So we'll involve experts to also say, in this particular situation, what ought to have been done by a normal, competent doctor. Okay, so if it was expected that they would have done multiple ultrasound tests, or it was expected that they would have recommended more frequent clinical visits, and they didn't, or it was expected that they would have recommended a certain medication, and they didn't, and as a result of which it led to complications, either of the child or of the mother, then there will be a medical negligence claim, and we will enforce it, and we'll be able to get damages for the aggrieved parties. So as always, this is Law 254. We strive to give you very useful content, very useful content. We use our experience in this space to also educate you, so that you're able to prepare for your cases in the event of such instances. So I think the next video, the gap that I've seen is, I'll need to elaborate what then does the standard of care look like for a mother who's going into pregnancy, so that they can be on the lookout. So the next video, I'll try and explain what the standard of care looks like, and in the event you pick out any of these that was not done in your situation, then you'll be able to know that there was a medical negligence somewhere, and someone needs to pay for it. So as always, thank you, and subscribe to our channel. Cheers.